Well, I appreciate you being interviewed by us here today. Thank you. I would love to talk to you about ag applied research. I know it's a bit of a hot topic right now. And with the government taking some funding away from that, what are we doing to adapt? How's the industry adapting?
Yeah. It's been a lot of changes in my career. So I'm kind of mid-career. I've been at it for around 20 years now. And I started off in private industry. I went to the federal government, and then I've been with Farming Smarter, which is a not-for-profit now for almost 18 years.
Okay.
And throughout my career, we started off with just about every resource that you could imagine to put towards that big transition towards zero tillage. So we had a lot of great farm groups. We had the commission groups. We had the provincial government, the federal government. And there was just a capacity of folks that worked really well together to help move the needle on farm. Since that day, it's really changed. And I've seen huge reduction in efforts through both the provincial government and the federal government. There's been layers upon layers of cutbacks. And I think we've got ourselves to a point now where we've actually got a human resource issue as it pertains to applied research and specifically connected to the farm.
That sounds like a challenge.
Absolutely.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think agriculture needs a strong voice. You've heard that probably many times. Yeah, it's a common theme, but part of that is, I suppose, smaller farms and less people involved in agriculture, but also less people actively engaged in advocating for it. And ag is sort of a long game, right? So applied research, extension, breeding, all of that sort of stuff has impacts over decades and not just days and months and years.
Right.
So when you make cuts, you don't really see the effects of that for a long time. And I think we're starting to really recognize that we're falling behind. I've recognized that in my own career, in our own little small world. Having just traveled the world looking at innovation systems in different countries and coming back, I've really recognized a few things, right? The importance of good ag policy. And I'm a science guy, and who wants to talk about policy? Yeah. It's not exciting, and even the farmer mentality is really about just putting your head down and doing a good job and doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
It's an independent role. So only those who are really good at being independent have sort of survived on the farm,
right.
Which also makes it, that it's not the personality type to get up and voice opinions too much or to get involved in larger issues outside of their farm. And we're starting to pay the price for it. So industry has been, that was always touted as the solution, is just more industry will pick it up, but they're only going to pick up the things that they can profit from. So then, this environmental side and the things that matter to farmers is sometimes getting missed. And in the province here, we lost all of the provincial government about 4 years ago. They tried to shift some resources over to post-secondary, but now they're struggling too. So it's just become the piece of the pie for ag funding is too small. It's becoming competitive. Collaboration is challenged.
Right.
And quite frankly, I think we're falling behind.
There's that move towards contract ag applied research, contract applied research. The pros and cons of that?
What do you mean by contract? Like just hiring out somebody to do the work? Yeah, we actually do that, even as a not-for-profit. I think having any third-party data is always a good thing, and making sure that we are applying appropriate science. Moving everything to the field scale isn't really accurate data. And the thing is you'll hear about, innovations in ag, and there's all kinds of amazing things going on. A lot of the departments, economic development, they'll fund sort of that value added or that flashy technology or big data or AI or genomics. I don't see a lot of it always hitting the farm.
Right.
So despite the novelty of the so-called innovations, to me, innovation isn't an innovation until it adds value and is being adopted on the farm. So I think there's a fit, but innovation in a whole is a system. And there's all different parts to that system that need to be functioning so that everybody sees a return on investment.
You mentioned earlier that you had gone on these trips,
Mhm.
and were there some examples of places where that innovation you can see it hitting the farm?
I mean, I went to Europe, I went to Ireland, France, England, Scotland, and then some very stark contrasts in Zimbabwe,
Oh
Africa,
wow.
and in New Zealand. And every place was different. The group that we got the scholarship from is UK based, so it was all sort of connected to that imperialism. And then you saw how agriculture, the history of development is so different.
Right.
So I did see all kinds of different examples. New Zealand was interesting because they got rid of all ag subsidies a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite a small, isolated country, and agriculture is still its number one factor in the GDP. So I saw quite an intensive effort along that innovation there.
Yeah.
That it's hard to scale because it's like the same size as Alberta. So
Right.
scale is probably the biggest thing that I learned. Is you come back, every country in Europe can fit into Canada, and then we have these broad scoped agricultural programs. Western Canadian is considered regional, and I think that's one of the challenges, is that we're not able to adapt to the uniquenesses of each one of our areas. And I think
Yeah.
that's a huge hole. At the same time, I think we have a lot of liberties in what we do in Western Canada, or in Canada in general, with the policy front, because Europe is just flooded with schemes, they're called, which is basically environmental subsidies.
Okay.
So sometimes half of their revenue is about these policies. They're being told how to farm, and that was a big influence on what I saw. Probably the most interesting one as it pertains to investment was Ireland.
Huh.
So the Republic of Ireland is not part of the UK, and they took a really different path, and they started building their agricultural capacity with this federal group called Chagas, and it from 1989 has built the same type of infrastructure that we just got rid of. So really stark contrast. And overall, I felt like on a per acre basis, for sure, we're completely underinvested compared to many of the countries that I visited.
That's concerning.
Mm-hmm.
So you go on this trip, you get the feel that we're behind, you can identify the problem,
Yeah.
but then what's the next step? What has to happen now? I mean, I know you said earlier what has to happen, but how do we make that happen? What
Well,
can we do?
I think what I've discovered and realized is that our innovation system is broken. So we need to make that whole again. And part of that is breaking down the silos within our own industry.
Right.
And there's lots of them, and there always is. Agriculture is probably the most complicated industry out there.
Of course.
And so I think the biggest thing that I saw is the people. The people is what matters. So I think if we take a people-focused approach to rebuilding our innovation system, that would be the first step. I do think that the group that I work for was a shining example of what we could be doing. And I originally wanted to go find other groups like us that were successful, and I had a hard time finding them. So that gives me a little bit of confidence and hope in what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's been a real challenge building our group as a not-for-profit up to the capacity. Like, I still feel like we're nowhere close to meeting the needs of Southern Alberta, but we're branching out, and we're doing the best work that we can. And I think more of those groups that have the capacity to not get too big, to not become bureaucratic and lost in red tape, we can really react and listen and have the relationships with the farms. The biggest thing I saw everywhere was a disconnect between the investments in research and innovation and applied research and the farm themselves, everywhere I went. And I think that's what we need to really focus on, is making sure that there's that connection and that it's driving the research in areas that will actually add value to the farm.
You said earlier that there was we're nowhere near meeting the needs of Southern Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
But can you pinpoint, if you had to make a list, top 3 things that we need that are the most important, could you do that? Or
that's a good question. I don't know that I could, but we don't have, like, on the human side of things, the human capital side of things, we need to make sure that we're attracting and retaining, highly intelligent folks to dig into this industry.
Yeah.
I think we're losing specialists. There's no soil scientists left in our province, there's not too many agronomy scientists anymore either. While there are some good scientists around, often they're guided by policy. So anyone within Ag Canada can only work on, certain things that are meeting higher level government agendas.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to necessarily interact with the farms and have that relationship and extension.
Right.
Extension's a massive hole, but I think it needs to be redefined as well. And for us, the extension piece, the relationship with the farmers, when we share our knowledge, is just as important that we get that feedback from them as to where to work. So Southern Alberta, we've got this irrigated, high value sector in agriculture. There's almost no one doing research in irrigated crops. So that's one that we're trying to delve into as well. We've got into potato research for the first time this year.
It seems like a popular thing to get into.
Isn't it
this
though?
year? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with the expansion and the attention to it, I think it's definitely popular. So I don't know that I answered your top three, but
it was maybe a difficult one.
It is a tough one, but I think, making sure that we continue to have the capacity to deal with the issues as they come, but also the freedom and flexibility to take risks so that farmers don't, and so that we can advance and continue to be this, some of the best agriculturalists in the world.